Hey everyone, I'm Catherine Davis, the Associate Editor at Chicago Inno. Welcome to our latest virtual event. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. As a reminder, all of the attendees are on mute, but if you have a question for us or our guest speaker, please send that question to the chat box provided by GoToMeeting. We'll be answering all these questions at the end of the event during the Q&A session. For anyone that's not familiar with us and what we do, Chicago Inno is a local publication covering tech and startups in the city and its surrounding suburbs. We're part of a network of 14 publications, which all cover tech and work to connect the people working in this industry. So make sure to check us out at chicagoinno.com, and there you can sign up for The Beat, which is our daily email newsletter. In it, we talk about the latest startup news, event news, and things that you need to know to stay plugged in. This afternoon, we're having a fireside chat with Godard Abel, the co-founder and CEO of G2. So thank you so much for being here today, Godard. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Catherine.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we really wanted to interview you for this event specifically because you have such an interesting background and you're now leading one of Chicago's most notable and successful startups. G2 started off in 2012 as a platform for software reviews, but it's now grown into a software marketplace where people can actually purchase softwares like Zoom and DocuSign. The company now also employs something like 350 people and has raised more than $100 million in venture capital funding. Did I get all that right?
Yes, thank you, Catherine, for the flattering welcome.
For sure. But you know, most of us know that G2 isn't actually your first tech rodeo. So would you mind giving us some background on yourself and your career and you know what you were doing before G2?
Yes, and G2 is the third company we're building, and all of them have been centered in Chicago. And the first two businesses, the first company was BigMachines. It was business software to help salespeople generate sales quotes, ultimately acquired by Oracle in 2013. Then we built a second company, SteelBrick, which was kind of a next generation BigMachines, also sales quoting software, ultimately acquired by Salesforce. And that also really inspired by G2. And obviously G2 really hope to take the next level and really build a global, meaningful company.
Right. So that brings us to 2012 when you launched G2. So, you know, can you kind of walk us through G2's growth story since then? How did you grow it to what it is now? I mean, you know, it's gone through some changes and, you know, so what was that like?
Yeah, and we started actually in my basement in Lake Forest, so out in the Chicago suburbs in 2012. And it was right after we'd left BigMachines and, kind of had our first successful exit. And we were thinking about what do we want to do next? And really our experience at BigMachines inspired G2. So what we saw, we were always selling business software and we saw two big challenges. First, our customers had a hard time discovering BigMachines software. A lot of our customers would find us. I remember Rolls-Royce, big turbine manufacturer, they finally found BigMachines and they said, oh, why didn't we know you existed? We're trying to build a software in-house. So we thought it was very hard to discover the right business software. And secondly, we were very frustrated by the industry analysts like Gartner that existed because for entrepreneurs like us, it was just too slow. It took us 9 years to get in the Gartner report. And so our vision for G2 was let's create a consumer-like selling and buying experience for business software. And obviously by 2012 in our consumer lives, we're buying on everything on Amazon. And we just thought, wow, for our work life business software, it's just way too hard for our customers to find and buy our software. And it's way too hard for us to sell it. And that really inspired G2. And what today you described as a marketplace for business software.
Got it. And so, you know, with everything going on in the world, we want to talk about coronavirus. And, you know, can you talk a little bit about how G2 has been impacted by COVID? Has the business taken a hit or have you been able to, you know, so far avoid any major downfalls?
Well, at G2, we've seen both positive and negative impacts. I think on the positive side at G2, we've seen our G2 web traffic grow more than ever. Our web traffic is actually up over 40% from pre-COVID. And that's a result of more and more businesses realizing they need digital software. Obviously, you and I right now, we're on a GoToMeeting webinar, but a lot of companies didn't have great video conferencing, they didn't have webinar technologies, they didn't have collaboration apps. And so that's why we've seen a massive increase in businesses shopping for software. And so that's certainly been very positive for us. I think on the flip side, on the negative side, our main customers are software marketers. And software marketers, like most of the economy, a lot of them have hit hard, so they're cutting back budgets. And so as a result, it has been harder for us to retain and grow our customers. And so all in all, year to date, we're 30% off our sales growth bookings plan, and we're still growing year over year. So in that sense, I feel very lucky to be in this part of the economy, but overall still challenging because we're not able to deliver on the growth expectations I've set with my investors.
Gotcha. Have you, have you had to downsize in any way or taken any specific steps to cut expenses?
We have, so I think since last year, the end of last year, we've reduced our total monthly spend rate by about 20%. And, some of that has been some painful changes we made. We have reduced our global staff by a bit over 10%. But we have been doing everything we can to minimize impact on our team. So we have reduced all our non-payroll expenses. We've also reduced our leadership compensation by 15 to 20%. And I was really proud of our leadership team, but they all stepped up and said, hey, we can afford to take a hit more than a lot of our team. And so I think we've been able to weather it well so far. And I think we're also proud, we have also built a G2 Gives initiative, and we have also continued some of our philanthropic efforts to help during this time, including just last week, I co-hosted the American Cancer Society Discovery Ball, and with G2 Gives, our whole team rallied. And so I think we're also still doing things to help the world, as we're all trying to get through this crisis together.
When did you first realize that the coronavirus is going to be a major problem for businesses in the US?
We really saw it start happening in March. I think that's probably the time you and we all started having to work from our offices. And I think it just created so much economic uncertainty. And sadly, I think we've seen unemployment in the US spike to 20% because some industries like travel have been totally shut down. And so I think, in March, all of a sudden it was like, whoa, like this is going to be a big challenge, not only for the world's health, but also for the economy.
Do you remember the day that you had the entire G2 staff begin working from home?
I do, and I remember it was a Thursday. Now I don't remember the date, but and I think all in all, like I said, as a team, we were fortunate, because we were distributed actually across many global offices. We have teams in London, Singapore, Bangalore. So we were all, and some people are already working from home, so we already had a good infrastructure. And so I think internally, it actually all in all felt pretty seamless. Even had some productivity advantages because I did find I could equally well connect with all our team members around the world and put everyone on a level playing field. So I think internally it's been pretty seamless, but I do think the big challenge has been for our customers. And like I mentioned, our marketing customers, a lot of them, their own businesses are facing challenges, a lot of them cutting back. And that's really been our focus is, how do we, one, make sure our team is safe and taken care of? And then two, how do we embrace our customers more? And that's, really where we're trying to work harder than ever to make sure we give our customers more value so they can stay with us even in this economic crisis.
So jumping off that, how exactly are you keeping your customers engaged with you at this time? Especially with a remote team, does that make it more difficult to, communicate with customers?
And again, I think we're probably lucky as a company. We run G2 as a digital marketplace for software. And so, our product, our service is digital, it's online, and it's just as available. That hasn't been affected at all. And I think also our customers were very used to working with us mainly remotely. We did go visit our big enterprise customers. So we do work with companies like IBM and Oracle and, those big tech companies. We'd obviously like to go visit to build our relationships to make sure we're serving them well. So that's been put on hold. But, we also serve technology companies and they're all also used to, working on Zoom or GoToMeeting. So I think that's been, I think that's worked pretty well for us. And I think the other thing we've been trying to use is, as I mentioned, our G2 traffic has grown 40% since COVID. And a lot of categories, actually like video conferencing, we're up 400%. And so we're using those data and that on the trends on what's happening in the software world post-COVID. And a lot of our customers are also fascinated by it because big companies, software companies like SAP, they're trying to figure out on what categories they should focus their own marketing budgets, their own resources. And at G2, we do have unique insights now, where we can tell from the almost 6 million sessions we're getting a month, we can tell, hey, what software categories are in demand right now, and allow our marketing customers to really focus on those and reach that audience. So I think we've been fortunate to be able to use those insights, that data, to keep engaging our customers.
As we have seen coronavirus unravel, obviously it's had an incredible impact on the economy. So, you were working in tech during the dot-com bust and the '08 crash. So could you compare and contrast this current downturn to what you've seen before?
Yeah, Catherine, what I'd say is, I mean, this, we're still in the middle of it, but, so far the first 3 months in, I mean, this actually has been more sudden and severe, than either the dot-com crash or the '08, '09 crisis. And I think what's made it so severe is, well, first of all, I think, the health crisis, and that we've lost over 100,000 lives here in the US. I mean, I think that's just much more dramatic than anything I've ever experienced in my lifetime. And then secondly, I think on the economic side, I think what's also been more severe is every sector of the economy is affected. Obviously, some like travel, hospitality totally shut down, but every single company now at a minimum is having to change how they work, and almost every company is freezing their budgets and rethinking all their business plans. So I've never seen this kind of a calamity across all sectors. And so I do think that's made it uniquely challenging. And I also think COVID, it's going to be hard for me or anyone to really put it in the context probably till we're about 2 years out, because we're only 10 weeks into it. And I hope, the world's health and economy starts recovering, but how severe and how long this is going to last, I don't really know. I wish I did, but so I think it's also a bit too early to really put it fully into context. But I will say, the downturn is unprecedented compared to anything I've ever seen.
Okay. So during the 2008 crash, this is when you were leading BigMachines, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what difficult business decisions did you have to make during that time? And, how have you used that experience to make decisions now at G2?
Yeah, and Catherine, for us, we were actually lucky in '08, '09. And as I mentioned, that recession was more in just a couple sectors. So obviously the financial industries, real estate, construction were hit really hard. But I think luckily BigMachines, we were an online software, cloud software product, mainly selling to other technology and manufacturing companies that weren't hit so hard. So we were actually able to keep growing our revenue through the '08, '09 crisis by over 50% a year. And in hindsight, it was actually a great opportunity because we hired a lot of great talent, especially in Chicago. And much of that talent is still with what we call our entrepreneurial family today. So they're helping us build now G2, or some of them are at the fourth company we're building, ThreeKit. So I think we were kind of lucky. And I think there are some companies and sectors, if you can grow now during this recession, it is actually a great time to hire people, right? Because there's so much talent available. And we were one of those lucky companies in '08, '09. Although I will say, the first financial crisis I lived through was a dot-com crash. This was all the way back in 2000. And that was closely followed by 9/11 in 2001. And that was also a severe recession. And frankly, we were an internet startup and our whole sector almost died. Even Amazon, people may not remember, but in 2000, everyone was saying Amazon was a huge bankruptcy risk. And a lot of people wrote off the whole internet sector. Obviously, in hindsight, that was a big mistake. And I wish I'd bought some Amazon stock when it was almost free. But, it almost killed us at BigMachines, and we had to go from 70 down to 20 people. And so that was really hard for me as an entrepreneur, and I learned a lot. So I have seen kind of both sides, where one, a recession where we really had to cut back, and then on the other side, one where we were able to grow. And a lot of that is out of our control as entrepreneurs, right? It depends on the industry and the customers you're serving. So, and then you really have to adapt based on, how it's affecting your customers.
Before we move on to the next question, I just want to remind our viewers or anyone that has jumped on recently that you can submit questions for the Q&A at the end in the question box provided by GoToWebinar. So moving on, you mentioned earlier that, Zoom has been particularly popular on G2 throughout this crisis. What other bright spots have there been, or, other really popular software during this time?
Yeah, no, so certainly webinars, video conferencing, that's been a very hot sector. What's also been interesting is some healthcare sectors, for example, HIPAA compliant messaging, that has been huge, or telemedicine has also been huge. So a lot of healthcare shifting to remote, requires a lot of software. So those categories have been really hot. And in addition, what's also been interesting, everything related to online learning, both in the business context, because now if you're trying to onboard a new employee, you need a great learning management system that works really well remotely to deliver the knowledge and the content, and also obviously educators, education software. So there have been quite a few sectors, and on G2 we have 1,800 different software categories, and we have seen over 200 of those grow dramatically during COVID. So there are some sectors and some entrepreneurs that are probably actually able to grow through this crisis.
Got it. G2 has talked about going public before. Is that still the plan?
Yes, it's still going public is still our long-term ambition. And for me also personally, it's an unfulfilled dream as an entrepreneur. We have had 2 successful exits, but we've never gotten all the way to ringing the bell. And really, we and I have no idea when that's going to happen, but I like it as a peak aspiration for our company because, to be able to take a company public, and I was very inspired by Eric Yuan, the Zoom CEO and founder who took Zoom public last year. And he spoke at our G2, our first ever conference, Reach conference in Chicago. And he talked about how he's really delivering happiness to the world. And so Zoom has just had a massive global impact, and he's built, very influential company that helps millions of users, also has built great careers for his employees. And he's done all of this with profitable, fast growth and a great stock price. And that's really my dream as an entrepreneur. And to build a public company these days, you do need all of that, right? You need to have a really huge market. You need to have a big impact on the world, help a lot of customers, and you need to be financially growing and profitable. And those are all things that are very healthy to aspire to. And that's why I do like it as an aspiration. Although, hopefully we get there. It'll only be a brief moment in time. Hopefully we do get to ring that bell. But I do think that aspiration to build a really meaningful, impactful company is very healthy for any entrepreneur. And that's why that's what we're striving for.
Has coronavirus thrown a wrench in any of your IPO plans or postponed them in any way?
And like I said, we're not close enough to have a concrete date in mind anyway, but I would say likely it's pushed back, just because we will have less revenue growth this year. And I do think next year, hopefully the health and economy of the world is recovered and we'll be able to start growing again at the rate we'd like, So I imagine it's pushed back a bit, but like I said, I think the real joy to me of entrepreneurship is building the business every day. And so if it takes a little longer to get there, that's fine too.
So now that some states are opening back up and, Illinois is expected to move into phase 3 next month, people are, now thinking about what it's going to be like to go back to the office. Can you talk a little bit about, what the plan is at G2, when you guys may go back to the office and what the office will look like, if there'll be any major changes?
Yes, and we're still, like most companies, formulating our plans and waiting for more guidance from JB Pritzker and the health authorities, et cetera. So it's not totally certain yet. What I do know is, one, we want to make sure our employees feel very safe. So, even when we do start to gradually reopen, we're going to make it optional, for our team. So anyone that doesn't feel safe, because of their own or family health issues or family situations, kids at home, certainly we'll keep it optional, until we're fully clear of the pandemic. So I think that's going to be one big change. We want to make sure, it's safe. And then, like I said, we want to give our employees the flexibility because everyone has different life situations right now. And so I think that'll be very important. And secondly, certainly when we gradually do start to open, it's going to be on a reduced scale to make sure we can keep safe distance, and follow all the other guidelines. And we used to do things like buffet lunches for the team. And obviously those kinds of, shared food, bonding type team events, unfortunately, won't be able to happen for quite a while. So I think it's going to be a gradual process, and I imagine it's going to take a year or two to get back fully to quote unquote normal. And I do think what will be lasting, there are aspects of working from home I'm enjoying, a lot of our team's enjoying. So I imagine we'll keep more flexibility and leave it up more to individual managers and employees to determine, what makes them feel certainly safe, but also what puts them in their most productive space. And so I do think we'll have a more of a mixed mode, in office, out of office, probably forever.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an idea of when you'd go back? Like maybe be this summer, this fall, or even beyond into 2021?
Like I said, it's going to 100% depend on what our health authorities, what guidance they give us, right, and what happens with the pandemic, which I certainly can't predict. But but I would venture that hopefully sometime during the summer we can start gradually reopening. And again, it'll only be for some team members that really want or need to be in the office. There are some family or personal situations where it's hard to work from home. And so once we can, we want to give those employees a choice, but I do think it'll be gradual and it'll only be a subset of our team initially. And then, as we can, once the health concerns, clear up, then we'll make it available to everyone that wants to come in.
Before the pandemic hit, did you and other G2 employees travel a lot for the business? If so, do you anticipate resuming travel again normally when this is over, or do you expect to, continue to take more virtual meetings when possible?
And yes, we did travel a lot, to visit, as I mentioned, our large enterprise customers, also to go to software industry conferences like SaaStr in San Jose or Dreamforce in San Francisco. So we do like to go network with our industry and our customers. And I do anticipate that travel coming back. I think most of the events are off this year, but hopefully next year, the health will allow those events to resume. So I imagine we'll keep going to those. I do believe there's going to be a more permanent shift, though. I think less travel, more remote, also with our customers, just because we've all gotten used to it. And I think both for our customers and our team, a lot of times not having to travel, saves everyone energy, time, and money. And so, while it will resume, I think it'll probably likely never go back to the amount of travel we all used to do.
Throughout the pandemic so far, what have you been hearing from your employees? What are their biggest concerns?
Yeah, and our G2 employees, first of all, I'm very, very proud of them because we have really focused on continuing to live our peak values. And one of our peak values is kindness. So I think our team has really stepped up to take care of each other, to take care of our customers, and they've remained focused, on taking care of our customers, improving our products, as well as continuing to grow our business. So I feel very proud of our leadership and our team that, in spite of all the challenges and distractions, they've kept focused, and we've been able to keep growing our business and keep moving forward. But of course, our G2 team, like the whole world, has a lot of concerns. I think for many, there's personal or family health concerns. And I think also, like I said, oftentimes very challenging work from home environments where maybe their kids are home from daycare or from school, or they may have elderly relatives or at-risk relatives. So I think there's a lot of personal challenges. I think what we're trying to do as a leadership team is, one, keep people focused on moving forward, but secondly, also be more flexible, because everyone's got different life situations, especially right now. And so I think we're also giving people more flexibility to work, when they can, and work how they can. And like I said, so far, I feel really good how our team and our leadership have responded to keep the business moving while also being able to take care of themselves and their families.
G2 is, of course, we know, just one of many startups in Chicago. So how do you see the virus impacting Chicago's tech industry as a whole?
And I think there will be an adverse impact, I think, on the tech industry around the world, including in Chicago, at least short term. Like I said, long term, I think it's going to accelerate a lot of tech trends. So as we were just talking about, a lot of these digital collaboration tools and technologies will keep growing and grow even more. But I do think short term, it's going to be harder for companies to raise money, harder to drive revenue growth. And we'll see that in Chicago. I think one advantage Chicago has is, now in this pandemic, and we have a lot of Silicon Valley VC investors, so some of the leading firms like Excel and IVP. And I think what they're advising all companies to do now is to extend their runway, do more with less, do more with their cash, and also get profitable faster. And I do think that's an advantage for Chicago, because the Chicago entrepreneurial ecosystem, and I have a lot of great friends in YPO Chicago, for example, many of them, like Sean Reeks, like Central, I'm thinking about, but they bootstrapped their businesses for years and have been profitable already. And I think our Chicago is more livable. Costs are lower than in San Francisco or New York. I do think that gives Chicago companies an advantage, because naturally, you have more runway in Chicago and more ability to get profitable sooner. So I do think on a relative basis, Chicago will get stronger.
Do you believe that the worst of the virus and the economic toll is behind us? Or, are there brighter days ahead, or should people, still kind of be bracing themselves for more difficult times to come?
Yeah, and first of all, I'd say I don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. But I am an optimist, and I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to be. So I hope and believe that we're past the worst of it, both from the health impact and from the economic impact. And I am starting to see some signs of that. Some of our customers are at least getting new budgets in place and able to drive new initiatives again. So I am hopeful and optimistic that, we're past the worst, but I do think it's going to take a year or two to, get back to quote unquote normal again.
And I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about ThreeKit. You mentioned that company earlier. They're a local startup focused on 3D product and augmented reality. And you led a $10 million round in them last year, I believe. So could you give us an update on the business and how it's faring through the pandemic as well?
Yes, no, and luckily ThreeKit was really well positioned to both survive and thrive through this crisis. And ThreeKit, did raise a $20 million Series A also late last year from some great investors, including Salesforce Ventures and Shasta Ventures. And in hindsight, the timing was great because the company still has all that money on the balance sheet. And secondly, what ThreeKit powers is AR and 3D for virtual shopping. And so you can try on apparel online. For example, this shirt, you can have a virtual avatar that could be virtual Catherine, and you can dress her with virtual apparel or jewelry or furniture. So one of the big ThreeKit customers is Crate & Barrel, another great Chicago area company. But part of what ThreeKit enables, you can see a couch, let's say, in your living room in a virtual sense using AR technology. And so that technology really is more needed than ever because, sadly, most stores are closed or just reopening. So you can't go into a store to try on clothes, to see or touch the furniture. And ThreeKit enables all that virtual shopping so you can try it on in a virtual sense with your mobile phone. And so they actually have been able to continue growing through this crisis. And so I am optimistic also for ThreeKit that the company will keep succeeding and be another exciting company on the Chicago tech scene.
Overall, what would you say is your biggest lesson learned from the coronavirus? Being a leader, being an investor, just being a Chicagoan, what have you learned from this experience?
And I would say probably the most important thing is just having a very positive peak culture and really having a team you can count on. Because especially in a crisis, like I said, I think it'd be very easy for people to get distracted and stop taking care of the product and the customers. And we really have had the team and the leadership really rally. So having an aligned team, aligned leadership that really believes in the mission of the company and is still enthusiastic to drive forward even when you can't see each other, I think that's been phenomenal. And so I do feel very fortunate and very appreciative of our team. And I would say, obviously, any entrepreneur, right, if you can build an aligned team with a common mission and vision and common values are really committed to, then when you do hit a crisis, that's when it really pays off.
And besides working, how have you been spending your time at home? Any new hobbies, any good shows you've been watching?
And that's been personally for me the fun part of COVID, if you will. I've been home for 10 straight weeks with my wife and our 3 teenage kids. And so that's been wonderful. I've never had family dinner, now probably 11 weeks in a row. And so I'm enjoying the extra family time, extra time with the kids. And probably like a lot of families, after dinner, we are oftentimes relaxing, watching some Netflix. And we've binge watched a couple of shows together. And my kids are now teenagers, so we're watching things like All American and Outer Banks. And of course, most recently, we really enjoyed The Last Dance, because my kids didn't live through the Jordan era, but have grown up big Chicago sports fans. And seeing Michael Jordan, and frankly, I also found him to be a very inspiring leader. Obviously, a tough leader, but that really resonated with the whole family.
Cool. Yeah, I have also watched The Last Dance and really enjoyed it. Well, Godard, that is all my questions. So at this time, we're going to transition to the Q&A portion of our event. Remember to submit any questions you have to the chat box. I'm going to hop off, and my colleague Jim Dalkey is going to join you to lead you through the Q&A. So thanks again for chatting with me, Godard, and thanks to our attendees. I'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it.
All right, Godard, can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi, Jim.
Awesome. Catherine, thank you so much. That was terrific. That was a really great Q&A, and love to kind of diving into a little bit about how G2 has navigated sort of this crazy time that we're in, and excited to dive into some audience Q&A that you guys have sent over. Just quickly, first of all, I'm Jim Dalkey, the senior editor at Chicago Inno, and the other half of the Beat newsletter. So a quick shameless plug to everyone out there to sign up for the Beat if you haven't already, and to tell your friends. All right, Godard. Well, we've got some audience Q&A questions. The first question is, how do you go about creating something, a company, that doesn't exist? Meaning, what strategy do you use to find funding partners and people to carry out that vision? It's a bit broad, but it's a good question. You know, how critical were those early days for you as you're building all of your businesses to kind of setting the foundation for the growth to come?
Yeah, and I think for me as an entrepreneur, probably like most, the first business is the hardest. Because I think by the second business, if your first one's a success, right, all of that gets a lot easier. But I think for my first company, BigMachines, it was one, finding a problem I really wanted to solve. And BigMachines was inspired by my father, and he was running a small pump manufacturing company. And this was way back in '99, but I remember he lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I remember visiting him for Thanksgiving, and we were talking about the internet, and the internet was still in its infancy. And I was talking to him about how it's going to affect his pump business, and he said it wasn't. And, you know, at that time I was in the Silicon Valley, and I said, Dad, no, the internet's going to affect everything. And that really inspired me to build my first company, BigMachines. So it was really a problem that was personal to me. I really wanted to solve both for me and my dad, because I wanted to help him grow his business, sell his pumps online. And that became very important. I mentioned earlier, BigMachines almost died, you know, after the .com crash. And I think without that real sense of purpose, you know, we may have given up. So I think that's really crucial to pick a problem you really want to solve, and usually for some personal reason. I think that will really give you the fortitude. And then I think the next hard step for most entrepreneurs, like for me, is how do you get the money, right? Especially the first company. And luckily also I convinced my father to make a small investment. And then, you know, I found kind of networked through friends, but I found some other angel investors. And so I do think also in building your team, I think the key is, as you're building your career before you're an entrepreneur, is to really make great friends. And, you know, my co-founders for BigMachines, I actually wound up, my 4 co-founders originally, I think 2 of them were my friends from college, from MIT. And so some of the best engineers I got to know through college. And then, you know, one of the other ones I'd worked with in a consulting firm at McKinsey. And, you know, the 4th co-founder, our CTO, I'd worked with at another software startup. And so I think that really is the next thing you need, right? Once you have an idea you're passionate about, you can find some money, and initially it probably has to be friends and family, but then, you know, also having a team, and ideally it's connections you've made, you know, through your schooling, through your prior work experiences, but really building, you know, really trusted peer relationships can also be the foundation for your own company.
I think that leads kind of nicely into the next audience question. The question being, you know, how do you find people with a great cultural fit? I think often the most important hires for new startups are those people that come just after that inner circle, right? So after the founding team, after the first couple folks you bring on, as you continue to grow very early on, you bring in that new wave of talent. How do you find the right people and make the right fit in terms of bringing in that next wave of talent to the company?
Yeah, no, and I think that's actually, I remember that at G2. So our first 2 hires were Brad Rosen and Molly O'Hare, and actually both, at the time our first office was in Highland Park. They're both living in the city of Chicago. Eventually we moved down there. I think they helped convince us, but, you know, we were living out in the burbs, so we just had a small office. But I think it was really what we tend to look for is more up and comers. You know, both Brad and Molly had some experience, you know, maybe 3 to 5 years, different job experiences, but they were still, you know, I'd say on the inexperienced side, but really wanting to build and prove something with us. And I do think, or at the time my co-founder Matt Gorniak says he likes to hire people with a chip on their shoulder that still have something to prove and want to prove it with you, because I do think those early entrepreneurial days it's all about perseverance and just figuring stuff out and doing whatever it takes. And so I think you really want people with that mindset. And at the beginning, it's more generalists, you know, that have the passion, that have the smarts, that have the talent, but don't yet have the experience. And then you figure it out together. I think that's what really, you know, once you get beyond your co-founders, that's what you really want at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, as you're continuing to grow and continuing to hire, you know, when you're interviewing new hires, what do you look for them in that interview? What really pops for you for a new hire in an interview?
And for me, I always start by asking them to tell me their story. And then, you know, usually people start with their work experience, and I say, no, I'd like to go all the way back, you know, to really understand. And obviously it's up to them how much they're willing to share, but, you know, where were they born? How did they grow up? where, where do they choose to go to school, why, what jobs, but so I really want to understand where they've come from. And then I always ask them, once I understand their story, is, hey, what peak do you want to climb? And, where do you want to get in 5 years? And if you do join G2, where do you want to be? And then, because to me, it's ultimately a mutual fit. Like, hey, does that peak align with the peaks we're trying to climb? And can we help you get there? And I think if that why, and I also love the book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. But, if you have that meaning, if you have a common why and a common purpose that aligns their career goals to the company goals, then I do think that gives you that motivation to grow and succeed with the company. And I think that to me is ultimately the most important thing.
The next question is about revenue. It's a two-part question. First part, are software marketers your only source of revenue? And the second part being, what do you believe is your current market share?
Yeah, and over 90% of our current revenue is from software marketers. We do have some exciting new products, including G2 Track, that is more for software buyers. And that's a solution that CIOs, CFOs can use to track all their software and cloud spend. And that's actually becoming very popular now. We're actually offering it on a free trial basis. If any of you want to try it for your own company. So I think, but that's a more nascent revenue stream for us. And I think that was the first part of the question. What was the second part of the question, Jim? I'm sorry.
What do you believe is your current market share?
And that's a bit hard to gauge. In some ways we compete with legacy incumbent analyst firms like Gartner and Forrester. And they're doing billions in revenue. And so compared to them, we have very little to the legacy model of the new online, disruptive online software marketplaces. We do believe now we're number one. And if you look at our Alexa ranking, we're almost a top 1,000 website now in the US. We're getting nearly 6 million visitors every month. And so we do measure our market share in terms of how much influence we have with software buyers by our web traffic. And on that dimension, I think we're doing very well. Although on the monetization and revenue side, we believe we're just getting started.
The next question, can you talk a little bit about conscious capitalism and why you decided it was worth investing?
Yeah, and I like to talk about conscious leadership. And I joined YPO in Chicago with BigMachines, I think back in 2008, so over 10 years ago. And through my YPO forum, and a side note to any entrepreneurs, an opportunity to join the YPO, I loved it. Phenomenal peer entrepreneur network. But I got in a forum with 8 other entrepreneurs, and they'd already been working with a conscious leadership coach, Jim Dethmer. And frankly, at that time, I was more of an engineer and like, hey, just give me the numbers, right? And I'm like, why are you guys talking about this? But then I met Jim and I met the coach, and he really changed my perspective. And because as an entrepreneur, I also had so much anxiety, and so much fear of failing and losing my dad's money, and I lived with that for years. And then I found a lot of work on your consciousness, which includes meditation, breathing, presencing, becoming more self-aware, both just first as a human, but then also as a business leader. I just found, one, it lifted a lot of the anxiety, allowed me to deal with the stress. And I think building any business as a startup tends to be very stressful. And so I think becoming more conscious has made me a better entrepreneur, but also made me hopefully a better husband, father, and just enjoy my life more. And so now consciousness is something I'm weaving into our companies. And at G2, we work with a conscious leadership coach, Sue. She's part of every leadership meeting we do. She coaches me one-on-one. As I think like most humans, I'm a work in progress. And so I do try to also weave expanding my consciousness, my team's consciousness into the work. And I do think it makes us both more effective and allow us to enjoy our work and our lives more. And so it is a big part of also, why I love building companies is weaving the consciousness and expanding it into the business.
Mm-hmm. And how does that weave into work-life balance? How do you approach work-life balance at G2?
And yeah, and I think it is very related, and I think I like to think of it as, and also I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle. Jim, I don't know if you've read any of his books like Power of Now or A New Earth, but he's also all about just being present, right? And I believe this life is a series of present moments. And so when I'm at work, or right now when I'm with you, Jim, I want to be as present and conscious with you as I can. And then obviously when I'm having dinner with my kids and my wife this evening, I want to do the same thing and be as conscious and present with them as I can. And I do believe that ultimately, and I don't know if you call it balance, but I think that allows me to, appreciate and enjoy all aspects of my life. And I think that's why, something I want to keep working on.
Mm-hmm. So our next audience question, if you had a crystal ball 1 year ago, what would you have done differently in regards to G2? Or think about it even pre-COVID, right? If you could have done something, preventatively in advance of this, knowing what was coming, would you do anything differently?
Yes. And I think it would have been good to do COVID or not, but this year we really shifted to focusing on what we're calling smart growth at G2, but putting more emphasis on efficiency. And I think the way we explain smart growth to our team is, hey, for every dollar we invest in an activity, it could be a marketing campaign, how many dollars of pipeline do we get back, right? And we were fortunate, we raised so much capital that in hindsight, maybe we got a bit wasteful. We were just all about innovation and speed, and we weren't thinking about being efficient. And I think that would have put us in a better position. And secondly, I think you can never be focused enough on your customers. And this is true in a crisis, right? Where every marketer we work with, they're stack ranking all their vendors, and a lot of them just cutting off the lower half. And so I think just even being more customer obsessed. And we did hire a new chief product officer, Sarah Rossio, in Chicago. She's also been part of a lot of great Chicago companies like Navtech and Power Reviews, but she's also really brought that customer obsession mindset to product, and just being so focused on adding value to the users and the customers that they can't leave us even in a pandemic. And so those are probably two things I wish I'd focused on even more a year or two ago.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How do you keep employees engaged fully remote? Obviously in person you can do the happy hours, you can do the team bonding exercises, but can't happen right now, right? What are you doing digitally or virtually to kind of keep the team engaged?
And we do have 350 people now, which I think does in some ways make it more challenging. So I think the key to me is that, one, I stay very connected with my leaders. Obviously we do regular one-on-ones by Zoom. And then that they all do that with their teams, right? Every manager in a company, I think at the margin, doing more one-on-ones, making sure there's more dialogue, with every leader and every employee in the company. I think that's very important. And secondly, maybe even a little easier to do, right? Because we have less time running around between meetings, et cetera. So I think really focusing on building stronger bonds one-on-one between employees and managers and employees, I think that's super critical. And then secondly, we are, like most companies, trying to bring some of this virtual. So I popped in, like our BDRs had a virtual happy hour, and I'll try to pop in on some of those team meetings. So there's a lot we can do by Zoom. And then also, I think what I've been doing more of, I try to write most weeks, I write what I call a peak chronicle. And where I'm sharing, it's essentially a Confluence blog post, 2 or 3 pages about what's going on in the business. And I'm also trying to be more transparent, even what are the conversations I'm having with my board, how are our bookings impacted by COVID? How will we have to adapt our costs? And I'm also trying to dial up the transparency and use digital tools. We use Confluence a lot. We call it G2's digital brain, so that ideally everyone in the company can see everything we're working on and can chime in, collaborate digitally. Obviously, we use Slack, and we also have a lot of Slack channels around employee recognition, which I think also really helps employee engagement. But we have what we call our peak awards, and it's an amazing Slack channel. Every day, multiple team members are nominating each other for their peak work and living our values. And so there's a lot we're trying to do to, without the in-person, still keep the engagement and the recognition and the love flowing across our team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right on. The next audience question we have is around the gender pay gap. Is that something you guys have evaluated internally and taken data on and have addressed in any way at G2 or any of your other businesses?
I think one thing, and we hired about 2 years ago a new head of employee success, Stacy Carlone, and I think it tends to be something you tend to start formalizing when you get bigger. I think around that time we had 150 or 200 employees, and I think one of the things Stacy has done, obviously across all genders, across our whole team, is introduce more comp benchmarks, and being more explicit, because I think at the beginning, like a lot of startups, we tend to just negotiate everything. And I think as we've all learned, and I saw also my last company was acquired by Salesforce, and Mark Benioff, their founder and CEO at Salesforce, has been leader in this. And then when you tend to look back, you're like, oh wow, when you negotiate everything, oftentimes the women fare worse than the men, just due to cultural biases. And so I think one of the things like Stacy has brought is that we benchmark for every role, every position. We formalize this. Hey, here is, and we try to go for at least 51st percentile cash compensation. Let's say for Chicago for that role. So that's no longer negotiated, but more of predefined career paths. Say at this level, in this job, in this role, here will be your compensation, regardless of your gender, background, et cetera. And I think that is really helping us make it more fair. But like most tech companies, I think we're still, the majority of I think we're maybe in the 30% in terms of women. So we're not at 50-50 yet. So we're also working on increasing diversity on every dimension. And like I said, Stacy's leading the effort to also make sure that the comp is fair.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that Chicago and some kind of newer evolving tech hubs can kind of avoid some of those pitfalls that maybe Silicon Valley made years ago in terms of equity and diversity and inclusion, especially as newer tech markets develop and gain traction? Is that something that Chicago and other markets can potentially work on avoiding even before it becomes an even worse problem?
I mean, I do think certain companies starting today or the last few years, I think the one advantage we all have, right, we're all more conscious of it, certainly as a tech industry. I know Chicago, you're helping, right? You're writing about it. People are talking about it. So I do think, and even myself as an entrepreneur, when I first started in 1999, and I started my first company actually in Silicon Valley, like people weren't talking about it. And frankly, like a lot of people, I recruited my friends from MIT who tended to be other nerdy guys, kind of like me. And so we didn't have diversity on our minds from day one. And I do think that's something that can be better today. And also I think in Chicago now with Mayor Lori Lightfoot, right? I think also having diversity in our leadership in the city, I think all of that helps to inspire it. But I think we do still have a long way to go. And I do think by default, the same thing I mentioned with my first company is I kind of went to my nerdy MIT engineer friends who tended to be guys like me. I do still think there's that natural bias, right? That you're gonna recruit your friends who are probably like you first. And so I do think all of us making conscious effort from day one, hey, diversity can help make the company better. I do think it will help, but I do think we still have a long way to go in Chicago at G2 and still in our whole world of tech.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, totally. The next audience question we have is in response to the crystal balling question of things maybe we would have done differently. You talked about some spending decisions you may have done differently. What specifically would you maybe have cut or reconsidered in terms of expenses looking back on it?
I probably would have hired a little bit slower. I think last year our goal was, hey, let's double revenue every year. So we also very quickly doubled our sales team. But frankly, without now allowing enough time for enablement and marketing and tools to catch up, so it was a bit messy, And then sadly, we did course correct, and then we wound up reducing the size of that team, letting some people go. And so obviously in hindsight, I think if we could have gone slower, focused more on enablement, getting everyone productive before doing more hiring, I think that would have been smarter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We have a question around university partnerships. What types of university partnerships do you look for, and how can those partnerships best serve the end goals of G2? Does any example come to mind?
Well, we are just starting, and it's still nascent. We haven't done a lot of formal university partnerships yet, but I think we have been talking to some researchers at Northwestern that also, that do a lot of research on consumer reviews and both their validity and their impact on buying decisions. So I think we're just starting that, where we do want to bring in some Northwestern professors to give us additional insights on all the data and help marketers make sense of. And one of the interesting things they've studied is, hey, is a one-star review good or bad? And intuitively, most software sellers, entrepreneurs, myself included, when I was building software, I'm like, the last thing I want is one-star review. But Northwestern's done interesting research that says one-star reviews actually help conversion. And on a site like G2, you don't want to be 5.0 stars because consumers don't believe it anymore. And you probably do this yourself, Jim. Like most consumers actually go to the one-star reviews when they're about to buy something. And I recently did this on Amazon. I was buying a Samsung TV and about 100 reviews, obviously mostly good, but I went right to 2 one-star reviews because I wanted to see what's wrong with it, right? Because right before we buy something, we get fear and we're like, well, before I buy it, I want to know what's wrong with it. In this case, one reviewer, the one-star review said, hey, it only has 2 HDMI inputs, got really angry. And I'm like, oh, I only need 1. And the other one-star review, the person just seemed crazy because everyone has some crazy customers. And that made me believe all the 5-star reviews. And so then I bought right away. And so that's kind of an interesting thing that Northwestern's actually studied, where they've said, hey, between 4.2 and 4.6 stars is actually ideal to drive online conversion on consumer sites. And we're now applying that same methodology to see, well, how does it affect B2B software buying? And we suspect it'll be very similar. But that's just, I think, one cool example where a local university like Northwestern is doing some very relevant research.
Mm-hmm. That actually is an interesting point. I mean, as a business built around reviews, are all reviews built equally? You have very thoughtful reviews, right? And then you do have the review that maybe seems like it's coming from somebody who's a little nutty. Like, how do you kind of evaluate the mix of reviews that you get, across the board in terms of the quality of review?
And Jim, you're right. Not all reviews are written equally. So we do, and we're now using AI because some products like Zoom now have 25,000 reviews. So no human would want to read all of them. And so we're using AI NLP to parse the reviews, one, to check for potential fraud and make sure they're valid, but two, to also see which reviews are going to be most insightful, most engaging to people shopping for video conferencing software. So we feature the 5 best reviews on the first page. And we also try to provide a balanced perspective. As I said, as a consumer myself, some of them will be 1-star, why people love Zoom, but maybe also a couple 1-star reviews, because a few people do get upset and maybe they had a Zoom bombing incident or whatever. And so we are investing a lot in AI software to, both score the reviews and make sure we feature the best ones. So if you're looking for software, Jim, we can give you the best reviews with the best insights right away.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Terrific. How much talking shop do you do with other CEOs around town, and how often are people coming to you looking for advice? Obviously, we're in kind of an unprecedented situation here, and the business climate is certainly very challenging. How much are you kind of leaning on other people who have kind of developed decades of experience, and how much are people kind of leaning on you for the same thing?
And I'm doing a lot of both, with fellow entrepreneurs. And I mentioned earlier in one of the questions that I joined YPO in Chicago, Young Presidents Organization, and that's been super valuable because there's 200 people in the chapter, over 100 of them are entrepreneurs, many of them also in software. And so I think, it's one of my favorite things is to go to YPO Forum and spend 4 hours with my peers just learning together and sharing our challenges and what's working and what isn't. So I'm a huge believer in it. And one cool thing about G2, I get to talk to software entrepreneurs every day. And a lot of them do want my advice because we have had built a couple of successful companies, but then I also get to talk to them about their business. And in some ways, that's part of what I love starting G2 as we serve on software entrepreneurs, and I get to talk to them every day, both as peers to learn and obviously if they're a software entrepreneur, try to convince them of the value of G2.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let's go through a scenario. A young founder starting a business, early days, comes to you for advice. What's a couple of concrete, sort of specific pieces of advice that you're giving out?
Well, I'm always very hesitant to provide entrepreneurial advice because every situation is very different. Every company is very different. So first, I want to ask them, give me more context, on both on their background and what they're trying to build with their company. And without that, I'm very reluctant to give any advice. Because it's very situational, but I think also what I talked about earlier, I think what's, certainly universal is one, creating a very committed, aligned team that really believes in the mission of your startup, your business. And because I think without that, no company will succeed. And I think also what I learned, my second company is being more conscious about culture. And that's why at G2, we have defined peak as our culture, and we train everybody on what we believe. And so I think as you start scaling at the beginning in one room, it's very easy, right? Informally, you get those dedicated employees, you form that culture. But then I would say the other big thing is as you start to scale, write it down and don't write down necessarily only what you aspire to, but what are you really, so that, new team members can understand, what you believe in, what your values are. And I also saw that at Salesforce when they acquired SteelBrick, Mark Benioff is religious about that. And defining and propagating their values even 20 years in. So I do think that's something also very important for every entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Got a couple more questions here before we wrap up. So many startups fail to launch due to lack of traction. Do you think universities and tech startup partners focus enough on SaaS sales, and how could they do more to help facilitate success?
Yeah, I do think a lot of universities now, I was in school a long time ago, way back. I graduated from MIT in 1993. And even way back then, MIT did have like entrepreneurial competition. They were starting to foster it. But what I do remember even back then was maybe there was too much emphasis on business planning. And now I think there have been great books like Lean Startup, right, that talk all about, hey, just get your product, get an MVP out there and start getting that user feedback, because I think that's how you're going to see, is this thing going to get traction or not? And I do think it's also easier now, certainly in software with the cloud and everything, you can spin up a test really quickly. And I do think that's also, universities where I think they can get more pragmatic, less focused on what's the income statement model look like, but just more, hey, what do you want to build? Who are you building it for? And as quickly as possible, get a prototype out, get a product out, so you start seeing, hey, is this dog going to hunt, right? Is it going to have traction? And I do think the whole entrepreneurial world, even the academic world, is learning that, but I do think that's harder in a university setting to just be super pragmatic about, hey, just build a product and start trying to sell it.
To wrap up here, which of these have you missed the most during the coronavirus? A sporting event, a concert, a restaurant, or an in-person business meeting? Which one would you want to jump into first if everything kind of gets back to normal?
I would probably say sporting event, and also like my boys are big Bears fans. My wife went to Penn State, so I think the thrill of going to a football game, hopefully by fall, we'll be able to do that.
I know. I'm missing sports myself. I was very avidly watching The Last Dance as well.
Yeah, and I'm also a fan of German soccer, and they've now gone back without fans. Actually, yesterday I watched the highlights of the Dortmund-Munich game, but it's just kind of weird, right, without fans. They were piping in the sound, and I imagine all the sports leagues will do that, but it's still just not the same, right, without the atmosphere of the fans. So hopefully health returns, and by fall we'll be able to go to some games. Let's see.
Yes, I'm with you there. Well, Godard, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. This was a great chat. We learned a lot. I hope you guys did too. This recording will be posted up on our site by tomorrow. So check back into Chicago Inno. You can see this in its entirety linked tomorrow. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. And please subscribe to our Beat newsletter. That's the best place to find new events that we're going to do like this. We're going to do a lot more of these down the line. So you're going to see a lot of Chicago tech folks talking shop and sharing some best practices and lessons learned kind of as they've continued to build and navigate their businesses through COVID and beyond. Lastly, be sure to send the Beat to a friend. Your coworkers probably could use a newsletter all about Chicago tech news as well, so send it around to your coworkers. We would really appreciate it. Godard, one final thank you for being a part of this. It's a pleasure to chat. Really appreciate it.
Wow. Thank you, Jim, so much for having and including G2, and thank you so much for helping the whole Chicago tech community. Love what you're doing with Chicago Inno. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, everybody, have a good one.